John W. Page was a physical anthropologist and a scholar, a co-founder of the Backlash, one of the most brilliant men I've ever known, and he was my friend. Less than 10 years before he died, he wrote the following: Feminism, an Unchallenged Social Revolution, 1996, Bellevue, Washington. In the early 1960s, a domestic revolution began which would become known as feminism. Today, that revolution is an integral part of the cultural scene in the United States and so much integrated into our daily lives that it's impossible to escape it for more than a few hours. As any anthropologist, sociologist, or historian can tell you, no true social revolution will take place unchallenged for long, and the same is true for feminism. What's most interesting in the case of feminism is that it has gone unchallenged for a considerably longer period of time than any other equivalent non-gender revolution. That lack of criticism in itself speaks volumes about real power relationships between the sexes in our society. Yet within the past couple of years, an emerging challenge has been forming, and while disorganized, it's becoming increasingly vocal. Author Susan Faludi sensed it and wrote the bestseller Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, in response. According to Faludi, feminism is finishing its second wave, the first wave being that which occurred at the beginning of the century and before the Second World War. The second wave, she states, was a quest for equality and access to social, political, and economic power. The backlash she refers to in her title is supposedly the response from the power elite, that is men, who don't wish to share. But is it really? Or is Faludi's explanation just a tad too glib? Might there be something else going on? Let's look. Any future historians of the 20th century, with their facts arrayed before them, would have to note that the emergence of second-wave feminism correlates more closely to the advent of widespread birth control than to any other social or economic fact of that time. And they would certainly note the first-wave prophecy of Margaret Sanger about the relationship between birth control and female freedom. They might also be forced to note the following in determining the meaning of late 20th century feminism: that with the widespread availability of female-controlled contraception, sex and reproduction were no longer coupled, so to speak; that the ages-old social mechanisms which had always required women to be calculating and discreet about sexual behavior could now be suborned; that these mechanisms had always previously required a sense of social responsibility in women which was now gone; that while women no longer had mechanisms in place which required social responsibility on their part, men still did. Nothing had changed for them. Our future historians would also have to look at the contributions the women's movement made to society after the acquisition of that reproductive freedom. It would be a short list. Despite the emergence of a large and vocal women's movement, social upheaval on a scale not seen since the Industrial Revolution, and the insinuation of women's issues into every aspect of daily life, there was, after 30 years, little of positive value to show for it. Our historians would be somewhat puzzled that no one seemed willing to point this out for decades. The most notable contributions appearing to correlate with the women's movement would seem to have been socially deleterious. The dismemberment of the family, the destruction of children, and the devaluing of men, all accompanied by a steady stream of bitching that required that everyone shape up, except them. Our historians would note that within the women's movement there had been no vision thing. No aspect of the movement concerned itself with contributions to society, only with acquisitions. These feminists said they wanted their rights, but they never gave a thought about what they would do with them. And while they kept acquiring more rights, men, children, and society at large were getting nothing, not gaining, not staying even. If they were economic historians, they might be inclined to make an analogy that they were studying the ultimate in a consumer society with female rights classified as just another commodity, a socio-sexual shopping trip, a forerunner of Reaganomics. The result was that after 30 years of accomplishing almost nothing of socially constructive value, the women's movement held that fact up as proof positive that they were still being discriminated against. And what would tell them that all of this was an offshoot of female reproductive freedom? simply the injection by the women's movement of sexual themes and undercurrents into every aspect of modern life, which trivialized every issue, from presidential politics to education. If sex wasn't involved, it didn't count. Sex became their idée fixe. Our historians would, the facts being as they are, predict the emergence of a backlash against a self-indulgent, socially vacuous, and nihilistic women's movement, and, seeing that it had finally happened, sit back with smug comfort for having confirmed once again that there really are laws of history. 2015, Olympia, Washington. Sadly, John did not live to witness the emergence of a MGTOW consciousness. In every way that mattered, he was MGTOW, and he would have laughed with joy, I think, to witness it. But here we are almost 20 years after he wrote about the feminist 30-year free lunch, and feminism's third wave is spreading like a plague of ravenous locusts. What would John's future historians have to say about that? The laws of history have not changed. Cycles still wax and wane, human nature remains the same. But for how long can we afford to continue indulging the evils of feminism? That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.